बच्चे होते हैं घर में अच्छे, बस 2 या 3 बच्चे होते हैं घर में अच्छे। ये बात है लाख टके की, ये बोल बड़े ही सच्चे, बस 2 या 3 बच्चे। बच्चे हो तो उनका तुम बोझ उठा सकते हो, उन्हें अच्छा खिला सकते हो, उन्हें अच्छा पढ़ा सकते हो।
Now in India, we have decided that we will put a billboard per 50,000 population. Then we put them behind the buses, one bus per 10,000 population. Then we printed 6 million posters, 18 million matchboxes. All the outdoor publicity has it, and this basic design is always there. So even if somebody can't read, and if he can just see the red triangle, he knows what it is about. Whether he goes to see a movie, whether he listens to the radio, whether he goes to buy things in the market, whether he goes to sell his grain, whether he goes to buy fertilizer, wherever he goes, he comes to the same. And the result is that you can ask anybody, they know what this symbol means, they know what these 4 faces means, whether they can read it or not.
What is the message actually?
The message is, have 2 or 3 children, that's all.
बस 2 या 3 बच्चे होते हैं घर में अच्छे, ये बात है लाख टके की, ये बोल बड़े ही सच्चे, बस 2 या 3 बच्चे। कम बच्चे हो तो उनका तुम बोझ उठा सकते हो, उन्हें अच्छा खिला सकते हो, उन्हें अच्छा पढ़ा सकते हो। कम बच्चे हो तो उनका तुम बोझ उठा सकते हो, उन्हें अच्छा खिला सकते हो, उन्हें अच्छा पढ़ा सकते हो। जैसे भी चाहो उनकी तकदीर बना सकते हो, तकदीर बना सकते हो, बस 2 या 3 बच्चे।
आ जाओ खेत में जाओ ना, आ जाओ।
Well, I feel that posters and radio and all the other modern media, very good. But how do you reach the people in the villages? You know, it's the size of the problem. You think of overcrowded India, the population explosion and all that. Facts like 1 out of every 7 people in the world today is an Indian, or 1 Indian baby is born every second and a half. The overcrowded conditions in the big cities and so forth. But India is largely an agricultural country. The real problem is, how do you reach the people in the villages? How do you find enough workers to spread the message? But 2 ya 3 bacche, you know, have 2 or 3 children and no more. Well, it has to be on a person-to-person level. For example, you might have to walk miles and miles on a country road to get a chance to talk to some women in the fields, because it's the harvest time and that's where you'll find the women.
जब हम गोली लाएंगे, जब तुम गोली भी ना खाने की, ना गोली तो अभी तो कह रही हो, जब लेके आएंगे, जब उससे भी पीछे हट जाओगी।
And then once you've got the women to sit down with you, you've got to start with the usual small talk. You know, how's the harvest this year and how's your youngest son? Before you can start talking about loops, condoms and sterilization.
What we are trying to do is create a social atmosphere for family planning. And the latest thinking has been now, as you see on our all these in this design, we only show 2 children. Though we say 2 or 3, but we show only in all visuals we show 2 children, because what we are trying to sell is that a family is complete when you have 2 children. A family is big when you have 3, and the 4th doesn't exist. We just want to try to wipe out completely that, because economic pressures are working now in favor of family planning. Prices are high and things are very costly. Now we want to have the social pressures if people see somebody walking with 4 children, they should shun the idea. She should feel awkward if she's walking with 4 children. That's what we're trying to achieve now.
Once I asked a woman, I said, well, I can understand about that one must have one son, but why do you insist to have 2 sons? And she immediately said, mother of one child is, one son is like a blind woman. If that son dies, she's got nothing. And the mother of 2 children is like a one-eyed woman, because if one dies, she still has one to take care of. So in that respect, they're wanting to have 2 children, which implies that the fear of death is still there, that the chance of the children dying is still on their mind.
Actually, our birth rate during the last 20 or 25 years has shown a slight decline. The birth rate has not risen at all. But the death rate has dropped very rapidly because of our health measures, particularly since our post-independence period. And as against the death rate of 29 per thousand, now the death rate is only about 16 per thousand. The expectation of life at birth has increased to about 50. And maternal mortality, child mortality is less than half of what it used to be 25 years ago. So all that has added to the population problem.
अंतर डालना चाहे, रोकथाम करनी चाहे तो क्या करना चाहिए, है ना? ये पता होना चाहिए ना, और आम लेकिन सब लोगों को पता नहीं होता.
She's telling them, many of you don't know about how a child is made, and yet several of you have 3 or 4 children. She's talking to a group of village women who are volunteers and who are going to work for the family planning program in their own villages. The doctor says, I am telling you about all this so you begin to understand what childbirth is and what birth control means. And she tells them that they have been doing this work, family planning work, for the last 3 or 4 years in various villages. She is saying that many doctors have been coming to see them, like Mrs. Gupta and many others, and now she would like the village women to tell her what birth control methods they know about already. And one of the women answers that she knows about the condom, vasectomy for the men, and tubectomy for the women, the pill and the loop. Dr. Sandhu says, well, now I'll tell you, and just as she says that, some of the women begin to laugh. They are a little bit embarrassed. So she says, this is not a laughing matter. This is nothing to be ashamed of. It's a part of nature. If they are ashamed of nature, then they should be ashamed of having children. And they should discuss this subject openly amongst themselves and talk about it even to the men.
प्लास्टिक है, बिल्कुल नरम है, आप लोग लगा के देख लो. तो इसलिए हम कहते हैं कि 2-3 साल के पीछे इसको बदलवा लिया जाए.
Then, she shows them the IUCD, which is the loop. And she says that this is something soft and made of plastic, and something a woman should change after 2 or 3 years. I don't think that any of these women have ever seen an actual loop before.
A few years ago, talking of contraception or even of family planning in mixed company was a taboo. People would be turned out of the rooms. But now, well, in families, I've heard this conversation in after-dinner sessions, even in leisurely sitting in the drawing rooms and things like that. There's tremendous change. People talk openly about this program. It's a topic of conversation. And not only in the sophisticated circles, but even in the remote rural areas. For example, in the panchayat meetings in the rural areas, they openly discuss this program. In the various offices, they talk about it. In the bazaars, they also talk about it. Now that is a big social change. That is, the people are now ready to think of how they can control the size of their families. That's a big change.
There is no religious opposition. But all is required is that the worker should sit comfortably with the people. You know, you cannot hurriedly go and tell anybody that now you've got large number of children and you must do something. Come, I will get you vasectomized, or take this and use. The problem is that people have to be convinced about it. They have to be talked about it in a comfortable situation, and giving them time to, you know, think of pros and cons, or even to discuss amongst themselves.
The worker is talking to a village woman who was using the loop before but is not using it anymore because she had a problem with it, bleeding and backache. And so the worker tries to convince the woman to get her husband to have the operation, vasectomy. But the woman says her husband won't agree. Then the worker says, well, I'll show you something for the man. And then she shows the condom and she says, your husband won't have any reason to say no to this. The woman sitting next to the worker says, women can convince their husbands to do so many other things, and why not this? You have 3 sons and a daughter. You don't need anything more. And the woman says, yes, even 2 children are enough. So, if your husband agrees to use them, you should go to the nurse and you can get them anytime, day or night.
फिर हम और देंगे ना, आपको क्या फिक्र है, चाहे कितनी इस्तेमाल करो तुम, वो तो हम देंगे ना जितने चाहिए हैं, हम देंगे, बहन जी से ले लेना, अगर हमारे आने से पहले खत्म हो, हम आते रहेंगे तो हम दे जाएंगे, घर में आ जाते हैं, बहन जी तो यहाँ है ही, चाहे रात को खत्म हो जाए, रात को ले हो जाके, ऐसी तो कोई बात ही नहीं.
Another problem we have in the rural areas is this: one case gets complicated or any trouble, this negative communication goes much faster than the positive. Those women who are having no trouble, they just sit quietly, don't talk much, except, you know, those who know. But those who have little trouble, they exaggerate their trouble. But gradually it seems that it's being overcome.
This is very interesting, you see, because we did not arrive at the red triangle by the trial and error method. We just thought of it one day, and we were sitting in Hyderabad in a rest house, and Commissioner, myself, and Mr. Frank Wilder, and we just thought, why not have the red triangle? And we just said red triangle. Well, we just went to the town and brought paint, and a can of paint and 3 brushes, and we painted it. And then we started looking at it, and we said, my God, it doesn't look that good as we thought. And then we invited a few girls in the evening from Peace Corps volunteers, and we wanted to pre-test it, and we said, what do you say? And everybody said, oh, this is horrible. You know, this, all funny explanations, it's red, you know, and the loop was in very great popularity those days, and the bleeding was there, and they said, oh, this will keep people away from it. This just represents that. Well, they suggested blue, you know, but I stuck to it. I said, no, it's not going to be anything but red. And it's very funny because next week we were going to a conference of Peace Corps, and these girls all came to the airport to receive us, and each one was wearing a blue triangle, and they said, tell us blue or red? And we said, it's red.
The male worker asks, when did you have the operation, vasectomy, you know? And the man answers that he had it 3 years ago. So he asks whether he has had any problem, and the man says no, he hasn't. You know, they have women for the family planning program to talk to other women, and they have male workers to talk to the men in the villages.
ये तो साहब हैं उधर वो मुरारी हैं, उनको भी बता करो कि भी मैंने नसबंदी कराई और कोई तकलीफ नहीं मेरे को तो हैं.
So the worker tells the man, why don't you convince 4 or 5 other people in the village to have the operation? And he says yes, he would do that.
हैं तो मैं आपको ये दे देता हूँ फार्म उनके साइन करा के मतलब
So the worker says, all right, I'll give you some forms. You ask these men to fill them out, tell them to write their names, how many children they have, how many boys, how many girls.
तकलीफ क्या है
And then, just as he is explaining this, another man steps up and says, many people say there is a problem with the operation and a man can get sick. Another man says, why don't you ask this man who has already had the operation and he's perfectly well. So the village man says, that may be so, but some men are weak and they cannot take the operation, so what do you do? So he says that there is absolutely no problem with the operation. It's only an operation of about 10 minutes and then you're perfectly fine.
और काम आपका जो है वैसे ही चलता रहेगा ठीक है नहीं बाकी उसमें कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता आप कराओ 10 मिनट का काम है उससे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता 10 मिनट के बाद आपने ये है बस भाई 1-2 दिन
You yourself have 3 and 4 children and isn't that enough? In fact, for a laborer it's more beneficial because if he has only 2 or 3 children to look after, he can take care of them properly. You can educate them properly, feed them well, clothe them well. Whereas if you have 10 or 12 children, you can't feed them, you can't clothe them, and then what do you do?
गुजारा भी कर सकता है यानी मजदूर आदमी के अगर 5-10 या दर्जना बच्चे हो गए तो वो कैसे गुजारा करेगा आप ये बताओ
ये तो
2-3 बच्चों को तो आप आराम से संभाल सकते हैं ना
He says, so the operation is very good for you. And he says, of course, there is also the loop that women use, but which is also good. But if you don't want the loop, then you should have the operation. And there is absolutely no problem. It's a 10-minute operation, and you're perfectly well after that.
कोई फर्क नहीं होता ना कोई तकलीफ होती है ना दुख होता है और वो बड़ा आराम रहता है उससे बेनिस्बत औरत की नसबंदी के मर्द की नसबंदी बहुत अच्छी है
कोशिश करेंगे साहब और उसे भी कहेंगे कोशिश करेंगे
बिल्कुल हाँ ये करना चाहिए देखो इसमें एक चीज का ध्यान रखना चाहिए
So the worker says, there are few things you must do after the operation.
सबसे पहली बात ये है कि आप जो
Number one, that you must take the medicine that the doctor prescribes exactly the way he wants you
नंबर 2
to.
कि आप अपने लंगोट को मतलब
Number 2, you must keep yourself covered.
नंबर 3
And the third thing is, you must not wash yourself for a few days. You merely need to rest for about 5 or 7 days, but you can walk around just as normally as before, and you'll be perfectly fine. And the man who had the operation says, yes, he says, you just need 4 or 5 days of rest. The man says, how can a laborer stop working for 7 or 8 days? What happens to his children in the meanwhile? How are they going to eat? So the worker says, you don't have to worry at all. The government gives you 28 rupees for the week that you are not working.
आपके बच्चे
बच्चे यानी 3 लड़के 3
एक सुई लगेगी आपके
हाँ
एक सुई लगेगी
बस
वो
A vasectomy, it's a very simple operation, almost a painless procedure, where we cut away a portion of the tube-like structure called vas deferens. What I do under local anesthesia, I mobilize the vas between my index and middle finger and the thumb, and I make a very small incision directly over the vas. We take out that vas and tie the 2 ends with the thread after having removed a portion about half an inch size. Takes not more than 5 to 7 minutes. It is a very simple procedure, can be performed anywhere, because we operate not actually in hospitals, but anywhere.
नहीं हो रहा भाई
After the operation is over, the patient is surprised doubly. Number one, the simplicity of the procedure, and secondly, the time taken for the whole procedure. Thirdly, when I told them that there's no stitches being put, they're surprised. Have you done the operation at all? I said, yes, of course, I have done the proper procedure. Then the patient remarks that, doctor, I'm sorry, I wasted my 2-3 years. I was thinking for this operation earlier, but I was afraid. Probably it's going to be a painful procedure and I might be confined to bed for a number of days. He says, unfortunately, thinking over this 2-3 years period, I have produced or added 2-3 children to my family, which was already the size of 7 or 8.
बस 2 या 3 बच्चे होते हैं घर में अच्छे, ये बात है लाख टके की, ये बोल बड़े ही सच्चे, बस 2 या 3 बच्चे। बच्चे हो तो उनका तुम बोझ उठा सकते हो, उन्हें अच्छा खिला सकते हो, उन्हें अच्छा पढ़ा सकते हो, जैसे भी चाहो उनकी तकदीर बना सकते हो, तकदीर बना सकते हो, बस 2 या 3 बच्चे।
How much do we do per year? Now, for instance, in 1967, we should have been able to prevent 1.7 million births. As against that, we have actually been able to prevent 1.2 million births. Now, considering that we are just making a beginning with all the inputs, staff, equipment, vehicles, I don't think we have done too badly in the year 67. At the same time, let me also say that we are also quite conscious of the enormity of the task. From the level of 1.2 million birth prevention per year, we have to reach within the next 8 or 9 years the level of 10 million birth prevention per year. That calls for much bigger and much greater effort than what we have been able to put in so far.
So we came to the conclusion that even these posters is not a very good medium, because the life is hardly a day or two. And then the question is, how do you take it to the various villages, and then who will display it? So now we have come to the conclusion that, okay, drop the posters and paint a wall. Now, if we paint one wall per village, it will last at least 5 years. And the question of maintenance and the question of display, everything will be covered, because once you have painted a wall, you have painted a wall. And once you do a thing like this, because it is not being done anywhere, everybody in the village will get curious. Even if he can't read it, he'll ask somebody, what is it? And once it is told, it is 2 ya 3 bachche bas, they'll be all, awareness will be there.
Well, you know, we have 560,000 villages, and some areas are, well, there are hardly any roads, and only perhaps a jeep could go. And the distances even from our nearest static center may be 15 or 20 miles. You can't expect people to walk all that way just to come and receive some service.
It's difficult for them to use contraception day in and day out, and it's difficult for them. We find in urban areas or with the educated people, combination of rhythm with the other methods. We cannot expect that from the rural people.
Now very shortly we have acquired a mobile van that actually does away all those handicaps. We can operate the person right in the van. We have got all facilities to operate inside.
But we do not have sufficient number of trained people, and doctor is one of those people that we are short of doctors, and especially lady doctors. And we have a lot of schemes now to encourage more people to come for medical education, one thing. Secondly, try those even who are trained as medical people to keep, to sort of entrust them to work in rural areas, because that's our problem. We don't have that much shortage of doctors in the cities, but our real problem is the shortage of doctors in the rural areas to man our primary health centers.
Recently we have received from the Population Council a supply of condoms, and this is what all it says, the red triangle. If you go to the store, you'll see the name condom or whatever you may call it has a little embarrassment still. You wait till everybody has cleared out and then quietly you ask, give me that. But if you have the red triangle, you just say, give me 3 red triangles.
We are having an experimental come demonstration project with the 100,000 women for these oral contraceptive pills. And if this succeeds, then probably the program will be enlarged. In any case, we have planned for doubling this number in the next year.
It's something, actually it's inherent with the program that we do not have an ideal method, and a good, foolproof ideal method. So that is why at this stage of the program, vasectomy has a major role to play. But as years go by, we may come across a better method, and then there won't be any need for vasectomy. So we consider vasectomy as a temporary phase in the program.
You might have heard the phrase cafeteria approach. We have the cafeteria approach as far as services are concerned. We allow the people to learn about all the available methods, then they make their own decision, which method appeals to them the most. Normally we tell them that just after marriage, the conventional contraceptives are the best because they can postpone the birth of the first baby. After the first baby, perhaps the IUCD is the best because it can look after the spacing between the various children. And after 2 or 3 children, we do advise them that sterilization is the safest.
We do not say happy family, planned family for the bliss and for health and happiness, because the idea is not very much of family planning in the present context in India. It is purely birth control. So we wanted to tell people what we expect them to do. Have 2 or 3 children, that's all. Because our program cannot afford to let people have as many children as they want. Even if everybody has in India 3 children, we will never be able to reach our goal.
You know, it's a very hard decision to have to make. After only 2 or 3 children, no more.
या 3 बच्चे होते हैं घर में अच्छे, बस 2 या 3 बच्चे होते हैं घर में अच्छे। ये बात है लाख टके की, ये बोल बड़े ही सच्चे, बस 2 या 3 बच्चे।